Listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 1 of season 6 of Colombo, Fade into Murder. First broadcast on the 10th of October 1976 on NBC. It was written by returning writer Lew Shaw and the new to Colombo Peter S. Feebleman and Henry Garson. Feebleman was born on the 1st of August 1930 in New York, but raised in New Orleans. He initially studied acting and performed on radio before finding work in Spain. He published his first novel, A Place Without Twilight, in 1958 to critical acclaim and received the Guggenheim Award and the Golden Pen for his writing. As well as 4 other novels, he has written cookbooks, including one with fellow writer and activist Lillian Hellman, whose biography he also wrote. He wrote screenplays for only 5 different projects in total, including 2 episodes of Columbo. The film Ensign Pulver, starring former guest actor Robert Walker Jr., and a TV movie Made in America, starring former Colombo murderer Susan Clark. He died on the 23rd of August 2015. He was 85. Garson was born on the 31st of March 1912 in New York. He wrote for comedies such as The Danny Thomas Show, McHale's Navy, and The Lucy Show, as well as films including GI Blues for Elvis and a couple of Jerry Lewis vehicles. This episode of Columbo was his last screenplay, although he died on the 29th of May 2003. He was 91. This episode is directed by returning director Bernard L. Kowalski. The episode begins at a house with a Rolls Royce parked outside, as a man inside accuses another man of murder. It's Detective Lucerne, played by Ward Fowler, played by William Shatner. Shatner was born on the 22nd of March 1931 in Montreal, Canada. After studying economics, he joined the Canadian National Repertory Theatre in Ottawa, training as a classical Shakespearean actor. This led to performing at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Stratford, Ontario, where he would understudy for Christopher Plummer, an actor he would go on to work with in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, the title itself being a quote from Shakespeare. His first major role was in The Brothers Karamazov with Yul Brynner in 1958, and from there his career continued to ascend, gaining film and TV roles in a wide variety of projects, including the classic Twilight Zone episode Nightmare at 20,000 Feet and the film Judgment at Nuremberg. In 1966 he appeared in the experimental gothic horror Incubus, notable for all the dialogue being in Esperanto. In that same year, he was cast in the second pilot for a new science fiction show called Star Trek. It only ran for 3 years, but made a huge impact on the pop culture landscape, to the point where Shatner struggled to find work in the 70s and would end up working for Roger Corman's micro-budget studio. He had already worked with Corman pre-Star Trek in the anti-racism film The Intruder, but was now working on more typical Corman low-budget horror, as well as appearing in many TV shows, including this episode of Columbo. At the latter end of the 70s, with much interest in Star Trek, and thanks to the success of Star Wars, he would return as Kirk in the first of 7 Star Trek film appearances. It was also cast as T.J. Hooker in the cop show of the same name, which ran for 4 years, between 1982 and 1986. In the early 2000s, he would appear again in a major television role as Denny Crane on Boston Legal for 5 seasons. He would continue to appear in film and in one-off television appearances from the 1980s onwards, as well as presenting, making documentaries, and establishing himself as a unique recording artist.
Rocket Man, burning out his fuse out here, alone.
as well as a breeder of horses. In 2021, he was the first Star Trek actor to actually go to space on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin space program. He is 91. As it transpires, we're on the set of a TV detective show, where the murderous butler, played by returning Colombo actor Fred Draper, flubs his lines, and Fowler tells a producer to get him replaced. It then cuts to studio execs demanding to executive producers Claire Daly and her husband Sid that Fowler is himself fired for costing them too much money. She tells them he's still a huge cash cow for the studio. Claire Daly is played by Lola Albright. We then see Fowler and Claire together as he reveals that they had previously had an affair, and she reveals she is sort of blackmailing him and getting half his wages for giving him the career he has. The expository backstory here is very unsubtle, with the two characters basically explaining their relationship out loud for our benefit alone. It's rare for Columbo to do this kind of obvious exposition, as the relationship between murderer and victim is usually done with far more subtlety. The scene continues in Fowler's dressing room as Claire tells him her husband is himself having an affair with her secretary, but she doesn't care, as she really only seems to care about money.
Is there anything that doesn't bore you, Claire?
Silver certificates. I would paper my bedroom with them if I could.
The exposition in the second half of the scene is slightly more subtle, but I do wish they'd spent just a little more time setting this up by showing us their relationship rather than telling us. It then cuts to Fowler breaking into the wardrobe department at night to steal a coat, then to the gun room to steal a revolver. Back at Fowler's house, he welcomes his pal Mark, played by Burt Remsen. Fowler offers Mark a drink, and despite being on the wagon, Mark takes it, which was probably a mistake as Fowler has slipped him a Mickey and he quickly passes out. This is all part of Fowler's alibi, as he records the baseball game they're watching, and then we cut to Tony's deli, where Claire is getting a sandwich from Tony, played by returning Colombo actor Timothy Carey. Fowler comes in with the gun and wearing the stolen clothes, pretending to rob the place. He knocks Tony out and then reveals who he is to Claire, who he then shoots in the back. After destroying the clothes he was wearing, he returns home and changes the times on Mark's watch and the TV, and plays the recording of the game so that Mark will think it's much earlier when Fowler wakes him up. Mark is still quite drowsy, so Fowler suggests he go to his guest bedroom, and as soon as he's fallen asleep, Fowler resets his watch to the correct time. Once again, the murderer seems to have set up the perfect alibi for himself. At the crime scene, Columbo is being brought up to speed by his newest sergeant, Sergeant Johnson, played by fellow Enterprise crew member Walter Koenig. Johnson explains the scene as Fowler wanted it to appear and reveals who the victim is. Columbo says he's a big fan of the Detective Lucerne show. Columbo then speaks to Tony and gets him to describe what happened. There's a nice little joke about Columbo's height that is quite beautifully underplayed.
Not a big guy. About your height?
Average height.
Well, that's right, average height. Or a little shorter.
What's shorter?
Then Columbo goes to inspect the body. After he's done so, he visits the set of Detective Lucerne and, in classic Columbo fashion, manages to blunder into the scene, ruining the take. He eventually introduces himself, and Fowler turns on the charm as Columbo looks for Claire's husband. I know Shatner used to get a lot of mockery for his acting, but I really think that that's misplaced when you watch this scene. where he monologues about his affection for Claire. Only a great actor could give the kind of purposefully unbelievably bad performance that he does here. There's not an ounce of sincerity from the character, who thinks he's Laurence Olivier. He tops this by making the mistake we've seen many killers make before, of asking what time it happened so he can announce his too perfect alibi, with his unwitting accomplice Mark standing right next to him to confirm it. Colombo must have thought it was Christmas when Fowler did all this, as he now knows from many past experiences that Fowler's the murderer. Fowler then acts terribly confused to try and make it seem like he's very fuzzy about the alibi, allowing Mark to step in and do all the work for him. Fowler tells Colombo,
You think she was murdered, don't you?
and it's Colombo's turn to put on an act, and he's much more convincing, as he plays up to Fowler's ego, asking how he could have possibly known that Colombo suspected it was murder. There's a lot going on here character-wise, so just for clarity's sake, I'll explain it. Colombo knows Fowler did it, but he's pretending he doesn't know. He's also pretending to be in awe of Fowler's talent for intuition. Meanwhile, Fowler is using his knowledge of the crime to pretend that he's a genius at solving crimes, while also making it clear that he couldn't have possibly have done it because of his solid alibi, and that he cared deeply for Claire. This is important because for the rest of the episode, Fowler sort of acts as if he is as good as crime solving as his character, Lucerne, while Colombo acts as if he's not good at crime solving at all, in order to break Fowler's alibi. This scenario plays out in the next scene between them as Colombo explains all the little details that are bothering him, and Fowler obliges by coming up for excuses for all the mistakes he made. Fowler even offers to help Colombo with detective work, which Colombo gleefully accepts.
Detective Lucerne helping me. Wait till I tell my wife.
They both then briefly speak to Sid Daly, but Colombo is no longer interested in the husband. He then speaks to Mark, alone, and discovers Mark's $1,000 watch is running slow, as Fowler set it to the correct time and Mark always sets it 5 minutes ahead, which of course Fowler couldn't have known. Colombo then goes to see Sid again on the Universal Studios tour, specifically at the Jaws ride, which I'm sure is a little nod to Steven Spielberg's success with that film after directing the first episode of Columbo. The shark still looks fake and is briefly a little bit distracting in this scene. Sid explains that he and Claire were married by name only, as they were no longer in love. He also explains she always fought for Fowler getting more money, but that they definitely weren't romantically involved anymore. Columbo speaks with Fowler again, and Fowler espouses a theory of how the robber killed Claire by mistake as she fled, only meaning to wound her. Columbo explains that when she was shot, she had her arms up, as shown by where the bullet went through her clothes. Fowler has no excuse for this, so has to shift to plan B, incriminate someone else. At Fowler's house, as Columbo struggles with Fowler's multiple locks, Fowler questions where the clothes came from, knowing exactly where they came from. And Columbo reveals there was makeup on the balaclava. Again, he knows it's TV makeup, but allows Fowler to posit that the killer might have been a woman, and Columbo pretends as if this is exactly his thinking. After Columbo's gone, Fowler couldn't look more smug if he had won first prize in a smugness contest. He then takes the opportunity to return the murder weapon to the studio gun store. The next day, Columbo goes to Fowler's trailer and just so happens to try on his shoes. Even though Colombo does have a bit of an obsession with shoes, I'm pretty sure he's testing out why the killer was shorter than Fowler. And sure enough, Fowler wears lifts in his shoes. Fowler catches him and he plays it off as curiosity. He explains to Fowler that he's just discovered the makeup is theatrical makeup, and he's checked with the wardrobe and prop department, checking on the outfit and guns. Fowler reveals he knows he's the chief suspect, as there are only 4 people who knew where Claire would be, and he's the only one who would be wearing theatrical makeup. Columbo agrees and says they found the gun. This is a beautiful scene that shows how good Shatner actually is. Gone is the faux concern of Fowler the actor from earlier. Now Fowler is relaxed and pretty confident, and he's clearly having a lot of fun with Falk in this scene. They remain together in the next scene, where Fowler now seems more immune to Columbo's tricks, as he tells Columbo,
Why don't we stop pretending that I'm brilliant and you're simple for one moment?
He also reveals that before he met Claire, he was a struggling actor in Toronto, pulling from Shatner's own humble beginnings there, and that his real name is Charles Kipling. Columbo goes to see Sid again, and Sid has inherited Claire's money, but he's very confused as to where it all came from, as is the taxman. Columbo pushes Sid about whether he really was with his lawyer on the night Claire was killed, and Sid admits he was not, but he didn't kill his wife, and calls his secretary Molly in. Molly is played by Shera Denese. Denese was born Sherry Lynn Kaminsky on the 9th of October 1949 in New York. She began her acting career in 1975 on the TV series Medical Story, and met her husband-to-be, Peter Falk, on the Elaine May film Mikey and Nicky. They married on December the 7th, 1977, just over a year after this episode aired. She would go on to appear in Columbo several times, as well as making a variety of other TV appearances. She is 72. Falk and Denese exchange some great looks as they pass each other. She admits to being Sid's real alibi. Back at Fowler's, he and Columbo are goofing around with Fowler's expensive recording equipment before Fowler suggests himself as the best possible suspect, especially as he knows Columbo knows his real name is not Charles Kipling, and that he's actually a Korean War deserter. But Columbo isn't sure that Claire would blackmail him, as she had as much to lose by revealing his secret. This scene is a little confusing, and not helped by Fowler pretending to be Lucerne, as it seems like Columbo is looking for a reason not to suspect Fowler by eliminating his motive.
If Ward Fowler's career was ruined, she wouldn't be able to blackmail him anymore, would she? He wouldn't have any more money.
What I think he's trying to do, although it's not very clear, is to show Fowler that Claire would never have revealed his secret, so that there was no need to kill her. It goes back to how Columbo thinks about murder in his mind. Through all his cases, he's never found a killer who had a good reason to kill, and here he's hinting to Fowler, a woman is dead, and you are going to go for prison for no reason at all. Columbo has called Sid and Molly to Fowler's house along with some uniformed officers, as they found a thread on the murder weapon. Columbo reveals the thread comes from a jumper belonging to Sid, but he remembers Fowler snagging on the jumper the day they first met. Columbo then reveals to Fowler exactly how he committed the crime, including completely destroying his alibi. Fowler says that's all well and good, but there's no proof. Columbo produces the gun, and Fowler says he knows there are no fingerprints on the gun, and Columbo says,
You remembered to clean the gun, but you didn't remember to do the same thing with the bullets.
Fowler admits it, but hopes that he was at least a sympathetic murderer. This is a really good episode, but with some really weak moments. I don't say this often, but I feel like this episode needs to be longer. They need to spend more time establishing Claire and Fowler's relationship more organically. They need to spend more time showing Colombo investigate the alibi. And they need to explain why the scene about Claire's hidden money is relevant. Or they need to simplify Claire and Fowler's relationship. The performances are all great. Shatner is a lot of fun to watch. The supporting cast are really believable. I'm not sure Lola Albright is quite evil enough as Claire, but I think that's down to how she's written. The overall plot is a great idea. I have heard it is supposed to reflect how Lincoln Levinson were feeling about Falk and Columbo, but I'm not sure I believe that. Although it does come after the cancellation of their excellent but short-lived series Ellery Queen, so maybe they were frustrated with Columbo's success and that show's failure. But I'm not sure I buy it, considering how hands-off they were with this script by this point in the show's run. It's a really fun episode with a few structural weaknesses, and the gotcha is a little simple, but at least it's fairly ironclad. It's a shame that this isn't the greatest episode, because it easily could have been with a few minor tweaks. Firstly, they should have defined Claire and Fowler's relationship more simply and found a better way of explaining it to the audience. Made more of Sid being the intended patsy than they did, as this revelation comes quite late on and is quickly dismissed. They should have made the discovery of Claire's hidden stash of cash more significant, and made the gotcha just a little bit cleverer. The biggest problem with it is that it renders the rest of the episode completely pointless. They found Ward's fingerprints on the murder weapon. Case closed. Really, the strength of this episode lies with how well Columbo and Fowler interact with each other, which is an absolute joy to watch. And for that reason, this is a 4 out of 5 episode for me. Thank you. Goodbye.